But $100 million cannot be faked. What are people paying you for? The printers, the ink, what? What is your business?
So we sell the printers. We also sell the materials that they use, and then some services. But the core of what we deliver is a complete system, a printer that can fit on your tabletop, that can basically take any 3D design, any CAD model you might have on your computer, and produce it in a range of different materials, and we supply those materials for you.
So you sell the printers, you sell the materials, and there were supposed to be these other two businesses that would emerge. One of them was like a marketplace, right? Or the other was software, or enterprise software. But I guess what I have to ask you is, when I first saw this, these were nerds and geeks who were printing Christmas ornaments or little trinkets that had no value in the actual real world other than the fact that they were magically created. And it was fascinating, but they really had no value. Who's buying these printers, and what are they printing, and what value do those things create in the universe? Is it still hobbyists making trinkets and telling you they can make you an ornament for your Christmas tree?
There's a hobbyist segment, and it emerged about 10 years ago. And that's a lot of what sort of triggered this wave of hype in 3D printing, because people thought, okay, now, it was used by industry before. Now there's some sort of looks like consumer usage, and maybe there'll be a mass consumer product.
Did that happen? Is there a mass?
That didn't happen.
Why do you think it didn't happen?
It didn't happen because a 3D printer doesn't do enough yet to make sense as a home product.
Got it.
That I think the concept of a 3D printer is it can take, it can create any 3D thing, any physical object you might want. And the reality of a 3D printer is that it can make a lot of different objects, but not any, and it fits in a certain size and made out of certain materials. And then there's also some skill still involved in running them. So all these things sort of put up barriers where the number of things you might want to make with it at home, it's not quite there.
So the friction, if I'm unpacking this, is it's still a little bit complicated. A decade or so into this, we're maybe in the second decade?
Well, so we're actually closer to 4 decades into 3D printing.
Well, I'm talking about the second decade of consumers playing with it. Like, when did consumers start having their first ones? It was the mid-2000s?
Mid-late 2000s. So
2007, 8.
I guess I could give you the full history. It started in the 80s, and for most of the history of 3D printing, it's been $100,000 and up, refrigerator-sized piece of capital equipment. Mm-hmm. Any big company that's doing some kind of product design, whether it's Ford or Boeing or Apple, has been using them since at least the early 90s. And then they kind of got better. Industry slowly grew. And then getting to the late 2000s, people started to make these desktop home printers. And
came under $25K, under $20K, then under $10.
Well, even $1,000 kits of parts that people were assembling. Right. The thing that really kicked it off was this open source project called RepRap. RepRap, yeah, which stands for
R-I?
R-E-P-R-A-P.
RepRap.
Yeah.
And what is it?
I think it's supposed to stand for Replicating Rapid Prototyper or something. The idea was it was a cheap one that would also be able to print all of its own parts, so it would self-replicate.
Yeah, this is basically the Skynet of 3D printers, which made geeks go even more insane for this. They were like, oh my God, I can buy a 3D printer and print a 3D printer. Exactly. It's like Inception of printers.
It is Inception of printers, and is an awesome, powerful idea. And I think there's some value to that long term, but the reality is you can print a small portion of a 3D printer.
I want to get back to the friction you mentioned earlier. One is too complicated. So it's much less complicated now. There's a lot of software out there for 3D models. There's a lot of things you can download off the internet. If you wanted a Darth Vader helmet, I'm sure you could go on the dark web somewhere and find a little model, even though Star Wars maybe didn't license it properly, but somebody's made a 3D model. I want to get into that too as well. Like, if I'm doing a clay, I might as well get into it right now. If I was making like a clay non-commercial piece of pottery, and I wanted to make a Boba Fett helmet or something, like, Star Wars is not going to come down on me. But if you made a
Disney
Boba
has
Fett,
been fairly aggressive.
But this is what I heard. But if you make a Boba Fett helmet and put it on a 3D printing site, they're going to come rain hell on you.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of new or kind of less well-trodden legal territory being uncovered with the 3D content, because there's certainly laws that govern this kind of IP, but it's not been really as tested or as enforced when it comes to 3D models, and so there's some new ground being broken there.
What do the...
But the reality is people use 3D printers. The bulk of the industry is still professionals.
Right.
And
but
for the most part...
was that part of what killed the hobbyist thing, was that you couldn't really do fun IP on it? Or it was like underground?
I don't think so. I think
just the friction
it's
of
a
it.
successful niche in the hobby market. It's a several $100 million of hobby business.
I would just think that if Disney made one of these printers and said, every month we're going to let you print out a new character from the Star Wars, you buy a subscription for whatever, $20 a month, you can print out the collectibles, and we're only going to allow 10,000 to be printed each time. Did anybody ever try that kind of like nonsense?
Some companies started going down that path. MakerBot did, I think, get into some of sort of like consumer brand partnerships. But again, I think the printers weren't and still aren't producing enough range of things. Like you can get a coarse plastic model that looks like something.
Okay, so that was my follow-up to your friction thing. What is it with the materials that limits it today? I'm an investor in a company called Desktop Metal. They do metal, which is really expensive and crazy. But on the consumer side, what is the limitation of the materials now? For the consumer, you mentioned like that was like you could only make certain things because the printer was only able to print certain materials. It's printing plastic now, right?
Yeah.
It's a resin or something in little spools of string.
That's one type of 3D printing. That's typically called fused deposition modeling, where you extrude a little string of plastic. We actually do a different process called stereolithography, which uses liquid resin and lasers to build up a part, and we can make much higher resolution, much more high detailed parts. But to answer about the materials, we're working in plastics. There's a huge range of plastics. If you look around this room, there's strong and stiff plastics, there's stretchy plastics, there's temperature-resistant ones, and all kinds of
flexible for cables, all kinds of stuff.
and all kinds of different properties there. And the range of plastics that all these things in this room are made out of is huge. There's like hundreds of thousands of them commercially available. In 3D printing, it's a much smaller set of maybe hundreds, and they're often not quite as good. So you're often trying to like meet something. And so that's a big part of what we do is we're trying to advance materials technology as well.